So let's talk about today's presentation. So today we will go through the health technology life cycle, who are the key stakeholders in the health technology ecosystem, why it's essential that you guys know about them. And then I will go through some examples to illustrate the factors that might impact the adoption of the technologies and what we can conclude from all of this. So, health technology life cycle. You may have seen the technology life cycle depicted in these four traditional stages. You have discovery, preclinical development, clinical development, and regulatory review. So before I move on, let me just ask you this question. At what stage of development is your technology now? And you may see a poll coming up on your screen. Oh, interesting. So some of you might not know, which is totally fine. Hopefully after this presentation, you'll know a little bit more where you are with your development. It seems that most of you, like 50% is in the preclinical development stage, and the rest is on the discovery clinical development stage. So, as it seems, a lot of you guys are in the preclinical development stage, right? Probably collecting in vitro, in vivo data to hopefully move on to the clinical development stage. Now, this is just one way that you can show the health technology life cycle. But another way to describe the progression of technology is through the technology readiness level that is shown in this slide right here. So the technology readiness level, or TRL, was actually originally developed by NASA in the 70s, which is a fun fact for you guys, to measure the maturity level of technologies using a scale that goes from 1 to 9, with 9 representing the highest level of maturity. And the TRL has been adapted for therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostic tests. I believe NMIN has its own TRL that might be available or will be available in the future. In the meantime, I would also recommend you to check out the NCAI TRL, which really provides you an excellent overview of each level and will help you to see at what stage you are in the health technology life cycle. And you might be wondering, well, but why would I need to know about the TRL? Well, for one, I feel like a lot of agencies and a lot of investors have been using this technology, this scale to help them understand about your technology. And also, I think it's very helpful to see where you are in the development stage and what are the next milestones and activities that you need to achieve to move on to the next level. But I won't spend too much time on this since this is not the main point of this webinar, right? Regardless on how you depict the health technology life cycle, going through all of this is not easy, right? We have heard stories that it takes 10 to 15 years to get through all of it, and many fails to bridge what we call the valley of death, which a phrase that is often used to refer to the gap between the translation of laboratory findings to humans. For example, some sources suggest that out of 10,000 compounds that start in the discovery process, only 5 out of those 10,000 will end up getting to clinical trials, and only 1 of them will be able to receive approval by regulatory agencies. But maybe you are that lucky one that got regulatory approval. And as you see this picture, you may think that that's the end of the journey. Well, I have proved that my product is safe, has efficacy, people will start using it. Unfortunately, many fail to consider factors impacting the adoption of the technology, whether patients will actually use it, whether physicians will prescribe it. And in translational research, this is a phenomenon that we call the second valley of death. Basically, it refers to the gap that it happens in the translation of clinical evidence to actual practices. And why is that? Well, for once, healthcare does not work like other markets, right? For example, let's say you need a laptop to run your experiments. So getting a laptop, the transaction is pretty straightforward. You go to the store, see the price of all the products, and you decide to buy one based on your values, how much money you have, and how much money you are willing to spend on the laptop, right? And in this case, both the consumer and the payer are one entity, you. But healthcare is a different story. In this case, there are many players involved in this transaction, and those players will have different roles and different values, and when choosing which technology they will adopt. So what happens in the healthcare system, and who are these players, right? So for this one, well, let's take Glybera. That was the first gene therapy on the market that was developed to treat a very rare genetic disorder. So like with other technologies, it all started with researchers like yourselves working on enhancing knowledge and developing new technologies to benefit patients. And in most cases, they might partner with manufacturers to further develop their ideas, to run clinical trials, and finally get a final product. And once you get the final product, let's say Glybera, the ultimate goal is to get to consumers, your patients. But healthcare is a different, as I said, healthcare works different than other markets. Why? Well, even if patients wanted the product, it's not like manufacturers can directly give it to them, right? Well, why? First, well, those manufacturers need to receive market authorization from regulatory agencies. So regulators like government, health authorities, professional bodies are responsible for monitoring technologies, ensuring the sustainability of the system, and ensuring that patients get equal access to safe and effective drugs. And each country will have its own regulations. So just a tip right there, it's important to understand the framework in which you expect to market your product. But even after receiving approval, patients may not be able to receive your product. Why? For example, in the case of Glybera. So Glybera cost about $1 million to treat one patient. And as you can imagine, a lot of patients don't have that money lined up in their bank account. So you will need a third party that will be responsible for covering your drug expenses, right? So payers like private insurance, public drug plans will be responsible for assessing technologies through a process called eHTA that we will review in the next webinar. But suffice to say that once the process is done, they might decide to cover for that technology. And if they decide to cover that technology, patients still won't be able to access the medication if providers don't prescribe them. And it's important to know providers, mainly physicians, act as gatekeepers of technologies. Manufacturers must demonstrate to physicians the value of their product, right? If they want them to prescribe the gene therapy or other medications. Patients will also seek the advice of those physicians when considering the treatment as well. And that's just a simplified version to showcase the main stakeholders of the health technology ecosystem, but it provides you a good idea of how complex the system can be. And these stakeholders will have different values and require different evidence as they're asking me different questions about the technology. So, for example, regulators are interested in knowing whether the benefits of that technology outweigh the risks for individual patients. And then they will balance those two and decide whether to approve it or not for the market. However, patients, physicians, and payers are looking at evidence beyond trials when making their own decisions. And they might have their own set of values and looking at different aspects of the technology when making those decisions. So, to understand a little bit more of what I said so far, let's take a look at some of the examples that will illustrate of what I've said so far. So the first one that I would like to discuss with you guys was the first inhaled insulin, which was called Exubera. So the discovery of insulin in the 20s was a significant breakthrough in the fight against diabetes, right? It was all thanks to researchers actually right here in Canada, more specifically in Toronto. And thanks to that, many patients with diabetes were able to survive. And to this day, insulin remains a cornerstone of diabetes management. However, diabetes is still a major public health issue. For example, last year it was estimated that more than 500 million adults were living with diabetes worldwide, and the disease cost more than $900 billion in healthcare expenditure. And some of the issues with diabetes is that there's quite a lot of poor medication compliance. So, scientists, including a biotech company called Nectar Therapeutics, decided to develop a new formulation of insulin, one that wouldn't require injections. Because, well, the rationale was, well, there are many people who are scared of needles. So if you reduce that barrier, then patients will be more compliant to use the medication. And then if you improve compliance, you will improve their blood sugar levels, thus improving patients' outcomes. And then the researchers managed to partner with a small pharmaceutical company. It's called Pfizer. You might have heard of it. They have been on the news lately. But yeah, a small pharmaceutical company. But anyway, so after years of running clinical trials, God who knows how much money they spent on that, the company finally managed to submit all documents for regulatory review in 2004 to the FDA in the United States and to EMA in Europe. So both regulatory agencies went through the review process. And what they found was that they were a bit concerned about the safety profile of the medication, and they felt that the drug shouldn't be indicated to patients who smoked or had lung disease. The FDA also advised patients who were using the product to check their lungs function regularly, just in case the product had done something. But nevertheless, trials also reported that the drug was as efficacious as short-acting insulins on the market. And then the regulatory agencies felt that, well, the benefits outweigh the risks. So the drug received approval in 2006. And then in 2006, the company started selling the product. And then they started noticing that, well, Exubera was underperforming. And to understand the reasons why, let's just first take a look at patients. So, as I said earlier, patients are the ultimate consumers of health technologies. suppose patients are not convinced that this new type of insulin will help them in their daily struggles with the disease. In that case, it will be very, very difficult for physicians to get them to use the medication, to start the medication, right? Patients will have their own set of values that they, when making a decision on which treatment to get. And it's important for us to understand which values play a huge role for the patient when making those decisions. So before I tell you guys what patients felt about the product, let me just show you what Exubera looks like. So this is Exubera. So I'm just curious, just put it on the chat. What were your first impressions of the product, right? Or what do you think patients felt about the product? Yeah, thanks, Leah. Yeah, that's true. It looks bulky, maybe hard to carry around. Yeah, it's true. It won't fit my purse as well. Cool. So yeah, so let's see what patients felt about the product. Yeah, a lot of them felt, yeah, it was quite bulky. It's hard to carry around, especially when, especially when you are, let's say, going to a restaurant, for example, and you have to carry that around before a meal because you have to take your insulin. And it's not as straightforward to use. It's quite difficult to use. It wasn't easy for patients to control the dose of insulin that they wanted. And at the same time, they felt that the product was more expensive than the other options that they had on the market, for example. They also had options like insulin pens, which I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's like it looks like a pen. It has a very small needle. It's not as painful as your traditional insulin injections. So that was the option. And the problem that a lot of patients had as well is that while the product promised that would completely eliminate injections, but in some cases, some patients still had to use insulin injections. So that was an issue. And then it came to physicians as well. So again, physicians will have their own set of preferences when making decisions whether to prescribe the medication or not. And one thing you need to understand about physicians is that a lot of them are late adopters of technology. So meaning that they're reluctant to change their practice. And unless they see any additional benefits that the drug or in this case, inhaled insulin will offer, they will not prescribe it. And in the case of Exubera, providers were concerned with the safety profile as was the FDA. And on top of that, they didn't see any added benefit from the product. Well, yes, apart from not requiring needles, what is the additional benefit? It was not better than the ones on the market. It was as good as the ones on the market, but it wasn't any better. In addition, think about it. Physicians have to learn how to use the product before teaching to patients, and that takes time. And on top of that, they might also have to run regular lung checkups to ensure patient safety. Remember that I said that the FDA advised them to do that. So think about a busy practice. When you don't have time, that's the last thing that you want to do. And especially when you don't see any additional benefit that the product might provide to patients. And basically what happened was that the product failed to gain acceptance among physicians and patients. And in less than a year, Pfizer decided to withdraw the drug from the market. And to give you an idea of the repercussions of that decision, a lot of other companies were developing their own inhaled insulin. So big companies like Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk were also developing their own, but by 2008, most of them decided to drop their development initiatives. But one company decided to continue developing their own inhaled insulin. So what happened was that in 2008, a company called Mankind Corporation, which is a biotech company from the US, decided to continue developing their own inhaled insulin. But they promised that the product will be fast-acting and compared to Exubera, will be less cumbersome to patients and would be a free needle option. So after years of research, spending that much money, Mankind submitted their product, which is called Afrezza, for regulatory review in 2009 to the FDA. And upon reviewing all documents, actually in 2011, FDA denied approval. And why was that? Well, in the meantime, the company decided to change the design of the delivery system. And most of their trials were based on the old system. So the FDA said, well, you need to run new trials to show that this new device is as safe and as efficacious as your other one. So did they decide to run new trials again? Yes. So they ran new trials. They spent more money on that because at the time, I think they felt it was a good idea. And then finally, the company had sufficient data to resubmit Afrezza to the FDA in 2013. So upon reviewing all the data, the FDA said, yes, based on the new trials, the benefits outweigh the risks. And Afrezza was approved in 2014. And thanks to that, around the same year, Mankind was able to get into an agreement with a big pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, who then was responsible to take over manufacturing and marketing for the product. So what happened with Afrezza? So this is Afrezza. It's actually it's the only inhaled insulin on the market right now. So what do you guys think? Just add it on the chat. What do you guys feel about this new one compared to Exubera? So you can be anything. Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, it looks much nicer. It's way smaller. Is it color looking? Yeah, I didn't show that there are different colors that you can get the product as well. It looks like an asthma inhaler, yeah, which is nice because maybe some people might be used to asthma inhalers, so maybe might be more familiar with this kind of product. Also, yes, so yeah, it seems that the product is less cumbersome than your first generation inhaled insulin. But as you guys may have noticed, there is a huge gap between the approval of the first one and this second one, right? Like it took them 8 years to get approval. And in the meantime, other companies were also developing their own technology to help patients with diabetes, right? And for example, if you look nowadays, you have a number of options if you have diabetes. Like you still have your traditional syringes, but also you have your insulin pens that I talked to you guys earlier. And those insulin pens also evolved to smart pens. Those smart pens are able to connect to your phone, and then you can download an app that you can calculate, track, send you reminders when to take your next dose. Plus, you also have insulin pumps, which is this, which is this device right on the bottom of your left corner here. And those insulin pumps is basically a small device that can deliver insulin to a thin tube that goes under your skin. And fancy new ones can also show you the dosage that you are taking, tracking, and everything. So as a result, based on the huge competition, well, the sales have not been great for Afrezza. For example, in their first year, they were only able to generate about $7 million. And maybe you might think, well, but 7 million is good money, right? But think about how many people I said in the earlier slides of like how many people in the world are diagnosed with diabetes. So 7 million is not that great. And in 2016, Sanofi actually terminated the agreement with Mankind Corporation, but they still remain hopeful that the product will eventually pick up and sales will improve. So we'll see what will happen in the coming years. The product is still available on the market. And you may think, well, but these are the risks, right, of developing technologies. They will fail, and there's nothing we can do, right? Just hope for the best. But is that true? Is that like just praying? Is that sufficient? Think about the millions that were spent on developing these products, running all those trials. Take the time spent developing those products just to get something that patients didn't want, physicians didn't want to prescribe it. Couldn't have these companies done something to inform the need a competitive landscape before continuing to develop the product? So, for example, in the time it took Mankind to resubmit a new request to the FDA, maybe they could have used, I don't know, early health technology assessment to assess the future pipeline and see the treatments that had been developed while they decided to run their trials. Or maybe both companies could have run what we called patient preference studies. So patient preference studies are able to explore what criteria patients use when making decisions about a treatment, in this case, insulin. And funny enough, actually, in 2010, our group conducted one patient preference study to explore the drivers of the decision around insulin treatment. And what the study found was that actually the main drivers that patients are looking when making decisions about insulin treatment is better glucose control and fewer adverse events. There's nothing to do on how insulin is administered. To be fair, the study had shown that patients who had never used insulin had some preferences for inhaled insulin. But once they started using subcutaneous insulin, they, well, basically tended to accept the injections. They managed to overcome the barrier, and other aspects of treatment like better glucose control, fewer adverse events became more important. So these were the cases of inhaled insulin. Oh, sorry. So now let's move on to another interesting example, which is the case of PCSK9 inhibitors. So cardiovascular disease is also another public health issue, right? It's one of the leading causes of death in the world. Part of the treatment will involve agents like statins and ezetimibe that will lower your bad cholesterol or LDL. And lowering those levels will decrease your risks for cardiovascular diseases. And in 2003, researchers found mutations in the PCSK9 gene led to changes in the level of LDL, or bad cholesterol. So as a result, they felt that, well, if we develop therapies that target PCSK9, we could have new agencies that have a new mechanism of action different from the treatments that are already available. And that's what two companies decided to do. So these two companies decided to develop human monoclonal antibodies acting as PCSK9 inhibitors. One of these companies was Amgen, with their own product called Repatha, and the other one was Regeneron alongside Sanofi, and they developed their product called Praluent. So again, after years of research, they finally had enough clinical data to submit their products to regulatory review to the FDA. And upon reviewing, the FDA felt that, well, the product's well tolerated, doesn't seem that it has any evidence suggesting there is a significant increase in adverse events compared to the control group. The product has shown to significantly reduce the levels of bad cholesterol compared to placebo. And then they felt that, again, the benefits outweigh the risks. So in 2015, both of them got approved. Yay. So in the previous examples, we discussed how important it is to consider patients and physicians' preferences when developing products. Now let's focus on another key stakeholder, the payers. Well, for payers, they will consider things like effectiveness of drugs when making decisions, but they will also want to know whether that drug is cost-effective and affordable before deciding whether to reimburse that drug for patients or not. And cost-effectiveness and affordability was especially of interest to payers in the case of PCSK9 inhibitors. And why was that? Well, in 2015, it would cost around $800 per year to treat one patient with statin. To treat the same patient with ezetimibe, it would cost payers about $3,000 per year. What about PCSK9 inhibitors? Well, for PCSK9 inhibitors, we would cost $14,000 per year to treat that same patient who would likely need that treatment for the rest of its life. And as you can see, yeah, it was a little bit quite more expensive than statin and ezetimibe. So in 2015, there was the Institute for Clinical and Evidence Review called ICER, and they decided to conduct a health technology assessment, which we will discuss in more details in the next webinar, so stay tuned. But they conducted a health technology assessment, and what they concluded was that, yes, based on the evidence that was currently available at the time, the drug improved intermediate risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Yes, so the drug really decreased levels of bad cholesterol, total cholesterol. They also saw the drug increased the levels of good cholesterol, or HDL. But regarding clinical outcomes like myocardial infarction, mortality, stroke, angina, well, the evidence was less clear about those outcomes as the trials were limited. They didn't have long-term data. Regardless, they felt that the evidence seemed promising, but inconclusive. So you have this promising new therapies. Okay, but then they started asking themselves, okay, what's the incremental cost for that potential benefit that PCSK9 inhibitors have compared to the treatments that are already available? So compared to statins and ezetimibe. So what the institute decided to do was to run a cost-effectiveness analysis. So basically, a cost-effectiveness analysis look at the costs and outcomes of the treatments and its alternatives. Basically, the analysis estimates the additional cost to gain a unit of a health outcome. So for example, in the case of PCSK9, they compare PCSK9 to ezetimibe and statin to estimate how much it would cost to avoid one major cardiovascular adverse event. And after running those analyses, they concluded that at the price points that the companies were asking, the product couldn't be deemed cost effective. And the price would need to be reduced by 60% to be cost effective. So the assessors felt that the drug was too expensive, but what about affordability? And why it's important to also look at affordability. And sometimes, in some cases, you might have a drug that is cost effective, but you might not be able to afford it, right? Let's say, for example, I don't know, a Lamborghini. You might think the car is cost effective, but that doesn't mean that you are able to afford it, right? So that's why they also assessed affordability. So they conducted a budget impact analysis that looked at how much it would cost healthcare systems to treat all eligible patients that would receive PCSK9 inhibitors. And what they found that it would cost them about $21 billion a year to give all eligible patients PCSK9 inhibitors. So to give you an idea of how much that would represent, the total drug spending in the US in 2015 was about $381 billion. So $21 billion would have represented about 6% of the total budget. So think about it, we are spending 6% of the budget only for just one therapy. And basically, as a result of this evaluation, basically ICE are saying, well, the product doesn't seem affordable nor cost effective. Insurance companies in the US restricted access to PCSK9 inhibitors. So for example, patients that wanted to access the product needed prior authorization. So physicians had to fill out multiple claims. They had to really show that other treatments were not able to lower cholesterol, and PCSK9 was the only treatment that patients could use it at the time. And in some cases, patients would also have to share the costs to access the medication. So for example, in the first year on the market, one study found that only 47% of patients who submitted claims to insurance companies got approved. And out of those who got approved, 35% didn't even initiate treatment because they had to share costs and they thought it was not worth it. And sales failed to meet both companies' expectations. Think about it. Those companies thought that they would have blockbusters like Lipitor, which was lower statin agent by Pfizer. That was a huge blockbuster for the company. But the worldwide sales for the product were quite low, finally triggering in 2018, finally triggering both companies to reduce price by 60%. It's hard to say whether access to both drugs will improve at this point, because once you fail to meet expectations in the first year, it's hard to recover in the following years, especially now considering that just last year, Novartis got their own PCSK9 inhibitor approved. And this one uses a different technology. It uses a siRNA technology that is different from the human monoclonal antibodies of Praluent and Repatha. And the advantage of Novartis product is that it only requires 2 injections a year, when you compare to Praluent and Repatha, which requires 2 injections a month. So what can we learn from all of this talk? And what I really want you guys to understand about research and development, that research and development, there's more to it than science itself. Again, good clinical trials data do not guarantee commercialization success. Having safety and efficacy data doesn't mean that payers, physicians, and patients will adopt your technology. So I hope that after this discussion, you will start thinking about it. Well, when developing my product, will payers pay for it? Will physicians prescribe it? Will patients use it? Why? Think about your own technology. Will my technology be cost effective? Will it be affordable? What is the added benefit that my technology has compared to current and future treatments? And what do patients value when deciding a treatment? And does my technology offer what patients are looking for in this in a treatment? Basically, having all these questions, I think, will help you further develop your product. But maybe you might be considering those questions too hard to answer right now. You might feel overwhelmed and might be wondering, well, but how can I answer these questions? Well, that's what we are here for, right? That's what the eHTA platform is here. And then we hope to support you guys in your development process. But now I think I talked too much, so let's have some time for a Q&A.
So Fernanda, I'm really excited by the opportunity that your platform is affording to our NMIN investigators. And I think you did a fabulous job of providing some examples where an early health technology assessment might have cut some very enthusiastic people off at the pass and saved millions of dollars in R&D expenses and marketing and sales support expenses. You know, in your experience, what are the main things that scientists don't know that they need to know if they're working in the area of biomedical innovation, especially in the area of new therapeutic approaches?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that I know, like, and I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak for all of them, but I feel like a lot of them might tend to focus on the science itself, which is great. But I think it's important to understand, well, is there a need for this product right now, right? Like, as I said, like, for example, like, I think it's really important to consider the patient's needs. And we tend to think that we know what they need, but we never ask them actually if they need it. And they will have their own set of values when making decisions. And if we don't understand them and we just launch a product that just feel like, well, but it reduces it improves your blood sugar levels, for example, but is that what they're really looking for? Like, they really are concerned about fewer adverse events. Does your product address those questions? So really, I think ultimately I would say that I've seen a lot of movement of even manufacturers moving towards having products tailored to patients, right? Which it seems like common sense, right? But I don't think we appreciate that, and I think we should focus more on that.
That's really helpful. So would anyone else like to ask a question or make an observation? I know Nancy Dos Santos, who is the technical lead for PharmaCore, which is another platform in the network, is with us in the green room today. Nancy, do you have any tips or comments or anything you'd like to put an underline under for today's participants in terms of your experience and the lessons learned the hard way that people who've used the PharmaCore services have experienced? Nancy.
Yeah, I would encourage that people engage physicians early on. I think they're key opinion leaders or whatever that can help champion what you're trying to make and help guide you. So that's a very important start, even preclinical or earlier than that. They can often address unmet medical need. So they're very important to engage early on.
Nick, have you got any comments that you'd like to make in this?
Yeah, I just had a quick thing to add. I think like, I mean, a lot of the HQPs maybe on this call maybe heard of stuff about like, you know, saving Pfizer money and development costs. And maybe that's not the most inspiring thing in the world, although it should be if you're thinking of commercializing. But I think you should also try to think about it in your own time. I'm sure everyone who's in biomedicine is motivated by trying to ultimately help patients and improve human health. If you spend 10 years of your life working on a technology that in the end doesn't really address an unmet need and is not going to get reimbursed, is not going to get to patients, you could have spent that time doing something else, understanding. So that's, I think, another reason to try to think about how to maximize the chances that your technology gets to patients in the end.
Great, thanks, Nick. So in terms of current projects underway, I know we always try to encourage people to put together a multidisciplinary team of people. Nancy's point is it's really important to have a clinician on your team if you're looking to develop new therapeutics. And Nick's point is that early health technology assessment will actually help you be more impactful in terms of your investment of your scarce time and resources, or your precious time and resources as an investigator trying to leave a legacy of impact in terms of improved patient care or better health for people around the world. So thanks for those extra points. And Marshall, I think Tim Lever has put a comment in the Q&A section. Do you want to read that out for us, or maybe Tim can ask it himself?
No, I was just wondering, you might not know off the top of your head, but you know, you gave kind of some case studies there of where this could have helped. Is there a case study of actually where these kinds of ideas were used and, you know, provided a good result?
So Tim, you're saying where an eHTA was conducted early and then that put them on the path to
Yeah,
success.
Exactly. We might not know, because obviously not, that might all be behind closed doors, but just curious.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it's easier to exam failures than exam successes. From what I understand, like most of the data, we don't have it because, again, it's mostly behind closed doors. But a lot of pharmaceutical companies will have their own business sector that will also look at the market access right at early development stages. So they have that set up, and I think that's why they're able to launch their product. I have some market success, but that's not the case with small companies like startups or even university-based labs, right? They don't have that resource available. So that's why we are also here to help you guys hopefully have better success rates than we had so far.
I might just add that actually Merck and AstraZeneca, and at least that I've seen, have published papers sort of outlining their early target assessment process that they implemented sort of in the early 2010s that actually led to dramatic reduction in late stage failures in their asset pipeline. So we can certainly, perhaps there's a way to share those links with anyone who's interested, but yeah, that specific case study is hard to point to, but like certainly the big companies have reported that's an important thing in their operations.
That's great. So maybe Fernanda can work that comment in, that point in one of the future webinars coming up. And unfortunately, we're at the end of our time today, and I want to thank very much Fernanda and Nick and Nancy for participating in this webinar today. And to our participants, thank you for also joining.